All right. Ever imagine opening up like 1,000-year-old employee handbook?
Can't say that I have.
Well, that's kind of what we're diving into today.
This is gonna be good.
It's wild. We're going back to the early Middle Ages, talking instructions from a bishop to his priests.
Gotta keep those priests in line.
Exactly. But what's fascinating is how much of this stuff still resonates today. It's like leadership advice from the 800s.
Timeless wisdom, huh? I'm intrigued.
So let's get into it. This deep dive, our source, is Theodulf of Orleans.
Theodulf of Orleans? Okay, gotta admit, the name doesn't ring a bell.
He wasn't just any bishop. Think scholar, advisor to Charlemagne.
Charlemagne. We're talking big leagues now.
Big leagues. And his instructions to parish priests, that's our 1,000-year-old handbook, it gives us a peek into what he thought was important for, well, the church, society, the whole
A
shebang.
peek into the past. Sign me up.
You ready to jump in?
Let's do it.
It's amazing to think something written so long ago could still be relevant.
Oh, yeah.
What kind of things did Theodulf lay down the law about?
He was really concerned about the education of his priests.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they had to be able to read and write, of course. But Theodulf,
Of course, yeah.
he took it a step further.
Really?
He insisted that they not only know the liturgy,
Okay.
the words and actions of the Mass,
Right.
but they also needed a solid grasp of Scripture. Like, he wanted them to be able to explain their faith clearly and refute heresies.
So he wanted them to be, like, knowledgeable, but also able to, like, communicate that knowledge.
Exactly.
Sounds like a tough boss.
He did have high standards, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But he also recognized that not everyone learns the same way.
Right?
He encouraged different approaches to teaching,
Oh, interesting.
like using art and music to make the Scriptures come alive for people
Oh, wow.
who weren't strong readers.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Like, he understood that people learn differently, and you gotta reach people where they are.
Exactly.
That's fascinating.
And he wasn't just focused on the priests here.
Yeah.
Theodulf believed that everyone, regardless of their social standing,
Okay.
should have access to religious education.
Wow. That's pretty progressive for the time.
Very progressive for the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've got education covered.
Mm-hmm.
What about some of the more, shall we say, colorful instructions?
Oh, yeah.
I heard a rumor about women and altars.
Ah, yes. That's one of the parts where we see how societal norms have changed drastically.
Yeah.
Theodulf was very clear that women were not permitted near the altar during Mass.
Yeah, so that's something that today it's like,
a
whoa.
little jarring.
It's a little jarring to our modern sensibilities.
Absolutely.
Today, sure.
And it's easy to kind of write it off as, oh, well, product of its time. But
Yeah.
I think it's important to at least examine why this rule existed.
Okay.
Theodulf was drawing on a long tradition that saw the altar as a sacred space,
Okay.
accessible only to ordained men. And this view, of course, had a profound impact on the role of women within the church for centuries.
Yeah, I mean, it makes you wonder what Theodulf would think
Oh, I know.
of modern churches where women serve in all sorts of leadership positions,
It would definitely be a different world for him.
Totally different.
But speaking of changing norms,
Okay.
Theodulf also had strong opinions on what he considered to be appropriate behavior for his priests outside of church.
Like what? Give me the gossip.
Well, he was particularly concerned about priests enticing followers from other parishes.
Wait, are you serious?
Oh, yeah.
Like stealing parishioners, that was a thing?
Oh, yeah.
Back in the 800s?
It was a no-no.
Wow.
Apparently so.
That's wild.
Competition between churches for tithes and offerings was fierce back then.
Oh,
But I think this also reveals something kind of interesting about the role of the church in society at the time.
okay.
The church wasn't just a place of worship.
Right.
It was a central part of social life,
Yeah.
a source of support,
Makes sense.
and a center of learning.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that a priest leaving with his followers would be a big deal.
It's like losing your star player to another team, right?
Exactly.
A real blow to the community.
Big time.
Yeah, so it sounds like Theodulf had a lot on his plate,
He did.
trying to elevate the church,
Yes.
deal with the competition.
Mhm.
And it makes sense if it really was the center of the community back then.
Absolutely. And that brings us to another fascinating aspect of Theodulf's instructions, his focus on hospitality.
Okay, hospitality.
Yeah.
That sounds a little more upbeat, right?
Than stealing parishioners.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
He was a big believer in the importance of welcoming strangers and those in need.
Okay.
He actually instructed his priests to open their homes
Wow.
and provide food and lodging without expecting anything in return.
Wow. That's really incredible. Like,
It is.
he was promoting this idea of like radical generosity and compassion.
Absolutely, especially back then.
Yeah.
When you consider that travel in the early Middle Ages was difficult and often dangerous,
Oh, for sure.
offering hospitality wasn't just good manners. It could be a lifeline
Totally.
for travelers.
Yeah.
And Theodulf really saw this act of generosity as a fundamental part of Christian duty.
It makes you think, like, what do we consider our Christian duty today, right?
That's a great question. Like, how do we measure up
Exactly.
to Theodulf's standards?
Speaking of standards,
Oh, boy.
we can't forget Theodulf's very specific instructions for Lent.
Right.
He had a lot to say about fasting and penance.
Of course, yeah, the medieval juice cleanse.
Something like that.
So what kind of, rules did he lay down?
Well, he was very strict about adherence to the Lenten fast. I mean,
Okay.
no meat, no dairy.
Wow.
For everyone except the sick and very young.
Okay.
And for Theodulf, it wasn't enough to just,
Right.
give up certain foods.
Right.
He wanted people to use this time for serious self-reflection and spiritual renewal.
Yeah, it's like a whole spiritual overhaul getting ready for Easter.
He even mandated confessions and acts of charity
Wow.
during the weeks leading up to Easter.
He took his Lenten preparation very seriously.
Oh, absolutely.
Wow.
He referred to it as a time for a second baptism.
Wow, that's a powerful way of putting it.
It is.
Yeah.
It highlights how Theodulf saw the Lenten season as an opportunity not just for personal piety, but for, strengthening the bonds within the community.
So he was really a man ahead of his time in a lot of ways.
It seems so.
Cared about education, community, hospitality, leadership.
It's grown.
Really gives you this fascinating glimpse into what life was like
He does.
over 1,000 years ago,
Amazing.
and how some things really haven't changed that much.
The more things change,
Right.
the more they stay the same.
What will people say about our instructions 1,000 years from now?
I don't know.
What will they find fascinating, confusing, maybe even a little shocking about the way we live today? It's something to think about.
It is.
Until our next deep dive, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep an open mind.